The first time I heard about skinwalkers was when I was a teenager, on a road trip through the southwestern United States. My family had planned a trip to the Four Corners region, a place where the borders of Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico meet. My dad had this obsession with the beauty of desert landscapes, and we were headed to Monument Valley, a land known for its towering red mesas and dramatic landscapes. But it's also known for something far darker. We were a few hours away from our destination when we stopped in a small town. It wasn't much more than a gas station, a diner, and a few homes scattered around a dry, dusty road. My dad needed gas, and my younger brother, Luke, and I were bored from being in the car for hours, so we got out to stretch our legs. While we waited, we noticed an elderly man sitting on the diner's porch, staring at us. He had sharp, almost piercing eyes, and his face was deeply wrinkled, a roadmap of time and hardship. It wasn't long before he beckoned us over. "Where you folks headed?" he asked, his voice raspy but calm. "Monument Valley," Luke replied, though something about the man made him seem uncomfortable. The old man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving us. "You're heading through Navajo land. Beautiful place. Sacred, too." He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "But be careful out there." My dad came over, curious about the conversation, and asked, "Why's that?" The old man hesitated, then said, "Strange things happen out there, in the deep parts of the desert. You might hear things, see things. Just make sure you don't go wandering off at night." With that cryptic warning, he leaned back in his chair, as if dismissing us. We thanked him for the advice and piled back into the car, ready to continue the trip. The man's words lingered in my mind, though. Something about the way he said it gave me the chills. As dusk approached, we reached our campground, a spot surrounded by towering rock formations and a vast expanse of open desert. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to move and twist with a life of their own. We set up camp quickly, eager to relax after the long drive. That night, as the temperature dropped and the stars glittered overhead, Luke and I sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows. The quiet was unsettling, only broken by the crackle of the fire and the occasional howl of the wind. My dad had already turned in for the night, leaving us alone in the stillness. Then, we heard it, a faint rustling noise, like something moving through the brush nearby. Luke looked at me, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart beginning to race. We both stood up, peering into the darkness, but saw nothing. The firelight only illuminated a small circle around us, and beyond that was pitch black. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. It was deep, animalistic, but there was something wrong about it. It didn't sound like any animal I had ever heard before. My instincts told me to back away, but Luke, ever the brave one, grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the noise. The beam of light swept across the desert floor, revealing nothing but rocks and shrubs. For a moment, we thought we'd imagined it, but then the light caught something, a pair of eyes, reflecting back at us from the darkness. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal, and they were unnervingly human. They blinked once, then disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Luke dropped the flashlight, and we both stumbled back toward the tent, terrified. "We need to wake Dad," I said, my voice trembling. But before we could move, we heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving closer. The rustling in the bushes grew louder, as if something large was moving toward us, its presence unseen but unmistakable. Luke and I froze in place, paralyzed by fear. Then, out of the darkness, it emerged. A figure, tall, lanky, and grotesque, stepped into the edge of the firelight. It was hunched over, its limbs unnaturally long, with skin that looked stretched and cracked, like it had been pulled too tight over its bones. Its face was the worst part. It was human, or at least it had been. But its features were twisted, distorted, as though it had been forced into a shape it wasn't meant to be. It stared at us with those same reflective eyes, and I realized, with a sickening feeling, that this was no animal. This was something far more sinister. A skinwalker. The creature let out another low growl, its mouth opening wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. It took a step forward, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me, like the air itself was freezing around us. Without thinking, I grabbed Luke's arm and yanked him toward the tent. We scrambled inside, zipping it up as fast as we could. But we knew it wouldn't stop that thing if it wanted to get in. We huddled together, our hearts pounding, waiting for the inevitable. The footsteps came closer, circling the tent, slow and deliberate. I could hear the thing breathing, its raspy breaths echoing in the quiet night. Just when I thought it was over, the footsteps stopped. The air went still, and for a moment, I thought it had left. But then we heard a voice. A voice that sent shivers down my spine. It was my dad's voice. "Kids? What are you doing in there? Come out. It's safe." But something was off. It sounded like him, but it was flat, emotionless. Like someone, or something, was imitating him. Luke looked at me, his face pale, and we both shook our heads, refusing to move. "Come out," the voice repeated, this time more insistent. "Everything's fine." We didn't budge. We stayed silent, huddled together in terror, until finally, the voice stopped. The footsteps retreated, and the night was quiet again. We waited for what felt like hours before we finally worked up the courage to peek outside. The fire had burned down to embers, and the desert was silent. Whatever had been out there was gone. The next morning, when we told our dad what had happened, he dismissed it as a bad dream. But Luke and I knew better. We'd seen something unnatural. As we packed up and left the campsite, I glanced back at the desert one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a figure, standing far off in the distance, watching us. But when I blinked, it was gone. We never spoke of that night again, but I still think about it sometimes, especially when I find myself in the quiet, empty places of the world. The old man's warning had been right, strange things happen in the desert. And I'll never forget the night we came face to face with a skinwalker.